Well, good afternoon, Zoe. Thank you so much for making your time to be here today. So of course, you've gone through your report, got some questions for you, but before we get to that, we're going to do a brief round of introductions so that, well, you're not conversing with strangers. So obviously we've met. I'm now chair of the Scrutiny Panel, engineering student, and I think that's pretty much all you need to know. So I think we'll go Sophie, Judith, and then Jahari. So let's go.
Hi Zoe, I'm Sophie. I'm a second year psychology student and the current Women's Liberation Chair at the Student Union.
Hi Zoe, I'm Judith. I'm a third year marketing management student and also the president of the Marketing Society.
Hi Zoe, I'm Hadi and I'm a criminology student and I'm in a second year.
Nice to meet you all.
Wonderful. Now that we're all best of friends and well acquainted, I'm gonna hand over to Sophie for the first questions for you.
Yeah. Hi. Chloe, thank you for answering our questions today. So in your report, you speak about other campaigns, joint campaigns you'll be doing with your other GSU officers, such as Attica's Know Your Rights campaign. How will you work with others to make this happen?
So I think for me, as a sort of returning officer, there were some areas of work where I have continued, areas which other officers have picked up, and also just passions that we've all shared. So for me, from the start, I was quite keen to make sure that officers knew that we could collaborate on anything that, I'm not going to kind of say, oh, I did this last year, so no one can get involved. So I am keen to kind of have that collaborative work. In terms of getting things done, I'm making sure that I'm sort of putting in meetings so that we can come together. So there are a few meetings I've got to just scope out what the campaign looks like for those officers versus what my vision was and how we can come together to make it happen. And yeah, I'm kind of at that stage now, just working out what they want to see. So with that Know Your Rights campaign, for example, last year I kind of put together an activism hub, and then I saw that Attica was particularly keen to run a campaign. So rather than just kind of go and do my thing and have her thing and maybe confuse people, I wanted to just check in with her, make sure our campaigns are not clashing, but also that we can join forces and share our ideas. Yeah.
Perfect, that's great. Thank you for answering my question. And now I'm going to pass over to the next panelist.
Yeah, so I've got a question for you where you're talking about intersectionality and Shag Week and Green Week. How are you planning to involve disabled students? How can they take part in that?
So there's a few different sides. So disability is one area that I want to kind of draw awareness to. So within Shag Week, me and Neela have been talking about doing basically there is going to be a day focused on sex and disability, and we're going to think about ways with students about sort of talking about disability, talking about I guess sexual health from that angle. And within Green Week, I met with Jabed earlier this week to discuss where disability can be considered, because something that I was always keen on when I was in eco team as a student was to have ableism within climate activism be addressed and kind of talked about. I did something on that last year, but I'm thinking of maybe exploring another angle, hopefully getting someone in to talk on it who may be more of an expert than myself. But just in general, when I talk about intersectionality, I really want us to explore identities that might not necessarily be represented. So it could be, for example, looking at trans Black people, or exploring how, for example, in BAME communities, disability is something that people don't necessarily talk about. Sometimes they don't think it's something that affects their community. So I'm really kind of, with that part of my work, trying to find different ways of, I guess, raising awareness about different parts of communities than the ones that are mainstream or more socially accepted, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does make sense. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Right, awesome. All right, yes. Also, Judith made a very, very amazing point earlier while we were going through your report. I think this will probably come in like your list of actions. If possible, could you not use acronyms or certain just abbreviations, acronyms? They're two slightly different things. But you know what I'm talking about. Great, without actually having explained it at one point or another, because there are a few parts where we're following along and then we just weren't following along because of an acronym. So going forward, please do make that adjustment. But yes, my question was based on your reactionary work. You made a very striking point about challenging the universities or the university on its quote unquote false promises of blended learning. And I wanted to find out what did that look like? What made it challenging? What did you do? I'd love to know more about that, please.
Yeah, so basically, as I guess my stance on the way that university sells itself can sometimes be that they do make false promises. I can understand to an extent that they have to recruit students, but I think particularly over the last year, they have had the opportunity to see how they may have they may not be able to deliver on certain things, and they shouldn't really have sold themselves as being able to cater to students in those ways. So for me, I'm still quite disappointed, having been here for a year, sort of telling them the problems that students are facing. It's quite disappointing when you see that there are still students experiencing them. There's still students coming here with a certain perception, and then it not turning out to be that way. I think particularly around issues of accessibility, it's quite poor to see that students are still not able to get adequate I guess lectures that they can actually hear, or captioning to go alongside that, or that for example, with the option that they gave where students could opt out of being on campus, that they have kind of said that they're not going to give an equitable experience, despite the fact that they need to, because that is affecting particularly our liberation groups a lot more. And for me, I am quite, I guess, I'm disappointed and frustrated because it's a conversation that's been going for the last year. It's probably been going on for years before that. So it's something that will continue to be a priority for me, because it's just not fair that students are coming here trusting that they'll be supported and then getting a subpar offer, or not even being able to access their learning. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I still want to probe you just a little bit more because it's a very topic actually. So of course you've been working on this for a period of time, and I think I just want to find out a bit more about. Well, we'll break this up a bit into two chunks. So on the student side, first of all, obtaining student feedback, what you've been doing with student feedback, what student feedback, let's put that over there. And then also on the university side of things, what kind of links have you been working with? Of course, you've got the connection with Jane, the Vice Chancellor. So what has happened on the university side, and then also with student feedback? Go ahead.
Yeah. So on student feedback, so GSU has a range of different ways that they've collated feedback throughout the pandemic, and that is all at our disposal to basically use to take to the university to make a case for whatever we need to make a case for. So in a range of spaces, I have been taking some of that research, but also there's been things where I've just sort of sat meetings with students and said, okay, what's the issue, or how can we resolve this? Would you like to be part of that process, or would you like me to just kind of advocate on your behalf? So for me, I quite like to understand students' stories and then I guess champion their cause where they may not be able to. I think an example from last year, sort of between the 2 years of being an officer, basically, I took a set of quotes from students that I'd kind of had through the year and basically said, alongside the data we had from our retention project, this is what students are feeling and we need to make things better for next year, because particularly our liberation groups are struggling and you know, this is their personal experiences that they have shared. And then in terms of, I guess, using the university or connecting with the university, so for me, I think there's different avenues. So we have a lot of meetings where we have the audience of directors, we have faculties, we have the vice chancellor, and I think for me, I've been trying to, I guess, find different ways to approach them. So, you know, we have had some backlash here and there because of the way that we reported things, and we've tried different methods. I think something that felt like it was making progress was a set of principles that we put together at the end of last year that we've kind of had to continue pushing into this year. And that was sort of principles about what the year should look like, given that we've had a year of COVID and the university should have learned from that. And what we've seen is that in some ways they've listened, but in other ways they haven't, which is where that frustration I was talking about earlier comes from. But I do think that for me, it's quite important to use the people you have and the spaces you have access to. I don't know if that's kind of what you meant by connecting with the university, but feel free to ask another follow-up if you need to.
Yes, it is what I meant, and that's really, really interesting to hear, and you read my mind. There's just a little bit more. Okay, cool. So you actually mentioned just now about a bit of backlash because of, you know, the way sort of that reporting was handled. And I'd actually like to find out a bit more about that before my final question.
Yeah, so last year, I keep referring to last year, I hope that's okay, but we basically collated evidence from students about their on-campus offer not being delivered. We took that to Student Experience Committee, which is the main sort of space for, I guess it's one of the higher meetings in the university, and a space for that kind of thing. And the officers kind of presented that, and basically one of the directors in the faculty was, I guess, felt quite upset because they, I guess, felt attacked because they felt they'd been doing their job correctly, and the directors came together and sort of, I guess, picked holes in the data that we'd collected, and I think because of the way we presented it, they missed the point and didn't maybe resolve the issue as quickly as they could. And I think from that we kind of learned, or I definitely learned, that we need to think about how we build a story, how we present information, how we make sure that if we are taking students' time or having them talk about their trauma to us, we need to make sure that we present it in a way that means that it's not wasted and that it is done justice. So yeah, that was something I definitely learned that I'm trying to make sure doesn't happen again this year. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I think that actually leads into my next question as well. So with all of this new knowledge that you've gained, these new strategies that you're working on. It's a brand new academic year. Literally, it's bright and shiny. It's going to be a wonderful experience and a wonderful opportunity just to try and improve on things that may not have necessarily been possible from last year. So my final point was, or rather question, I suppose, was what does an ideal response to this scenario look like from you? Provided, okay, so it's reactionary work, so of course you have your main campaigns to focus on. But ideally, what would you like to see change to the point where you're satisfied that, okay, this was the issue, this is the resolution, and this is what I want to get out of it?
So specifically on sort of the accessibility and the false promises, yeah. I think for me, I would like to see the university, I guess, do the basics. I think they're still not doing basics when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to just, I guess, hearing what students are saying about communication, things like that. I think we are moving to a place where they're trying to be more efficient, which should help. But I do think that in some ways they still don't, I guess, take on what we're saying, and you'll be repeating yourself for a long time, and then they start to have the conversation. So I would like to gain some ground and hopefully find ways to make a bigger impact or get heard quicker so that future officer teams can make more progress in a shorter time. I think I would like our students to understand a bit more about how they can use us, how they can, I guess, hold the union and the university to account, because I think often it is not left on us, but the university is able to get away with just saying, oh, well, the officers are the people we've spoken to, so that's sufficient. I'd like to get to a point where we can be sharing our platform with students more, bringing them into spaces where they want to be in those spaces, and yeah, hopefully kind of, I guess, showing the university that students aren't as simple as just the 4 officers. Like you can't say, oh, they're all the same as Zoe, they're all the same as Attica. Like there's a lot of different kinds of people here, and unfortunately not all types of students do end up becoming officers. So I really want, as a union, I'd like us to be more able to represent students, so that we can hopefully crack the issue of getting different kinds of students catered for. Yeah.
Brilliant, wonderful, wonderful. I know it's been a long time on this question. Just one final thing, before I hand over for the final question. So again, in this ideal world of getting the university to actually agree on certain basic necessities, how would you like to see them being held accountable? Because we can have all these plans and say, okay, we're going to be doing this and doing this, but how would you like to see them actually say, okay, you said this, we're going to pull you up to scratch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in one sense, us as officers have a responsibility to be chasing them and to be, saying, oh, well, this was in the minutes 3 years ago and you haven't done it. We should be kind of, I guess, on it in that sense. Like we should be able to chase them on things. I do think that for me, one solution to it is the students being aware and understanding that they can challenge on certain things. Unfortunately, most students only do 1 degree here and they think that's just what uni is, and I want students to be able to, I want to create space where students can sort of talk to each other and realise the issues that they're facing and feel like as a collective they can come together and sort of demand better. But yeah, I think for me it's more about just, I guess, having that space, as opposed to like I don't know what the alternative is, but yeah, I kind of want people who are asking questions, and I want to be asking questions. I don't want it to be that you know, that they're able to kind of keep going because nobody has said, oh, what about these students? What about these students? It should be something that doesn't kind of fall into the cycle of students leaving as well. I think a big issue is that as soon as a set of students leave or a set of officers leave, they can sort of say, oh, well, they're gone. We can kind of continue. These people won't chase us because they haven't got the history of what's been happening. But I think there is work that we're doing in the union to help that, but I would like that to be a stronger process as well, like just making sure that we do have a continuous timeline of action rather than sort of stopping and starting.
Okay, brilliant, amazing. That's really good. I'm loving especially what you're sharing about all the power of the unified voice in the student body. But boy, okay, the time is far spent, so I'm gonna hand over to Shari, and she's gonna take your final question, and then any other questions will be opened up for that.
Hi, as you are a second year officer, how are you going to make more progress than last year? And what are you doing differently to last year?
So for me, I've kind of picked up a few different areas from what I was working on last year. So for example, sports, Avery Hill, those are new things for me. And I've kind of continued with things like liberation. So I am kind of keen to, I guess, have an impact across the board because I've run in, I don't know how many elections I've run in, but I've got so many things, at least in the manifesto, let alone all the other things that come through that I've wanted to make an impact on. And knowing that I've got less than a year left, I want to make sure I can at least prepare the next officer team to be able to deliver on certain things. I think for me, I've learned a lot about maybe my shortcomings or where I need to, I guess, learn to do better so that I can be more effective as an officer. So I'm kind of trying to continue working on like my personal skills to be able to do a better job. I think I've also kind of been thinking about things a bit differently because this year I've noticed some of the stuff I'm wanting to do. For example, with decolonizing, I want to develop some principles so people can kind of measure their how well they're doing or just what they are doing for decolonizing, or thinking about training and development for students. I think with those, I've noticed that I'm trying to do things that set things up to continue and can go on for longer rather than last year where they may have been, I think a lot more was reactive, a lot more was, I guess, within like that officer year, if that makes sense. Like I want things that can last. I think for me, I've always been someone who wants to work on policy. So I'm kind of trying to do as much as I can and just really making sure that if I can have a positive impact, that it's used on things that last rather than those sort of one-off things. But at the same time, recognizing that sometimes people just want those one-off things just for a bit of fun and stuff like that. Yeah, so I've kind of learned from last year, but I am optimistic that this year will be better, and I just hope that I do a good job. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the questions that we had prepared for you today. However, we still have 5 minutes. So does anyone have any other questions for Zoe? It can be on her report or her remit or anything at all. Let's go for Sophie first.
Hi. I wanted to ask about your NSS task force for the Faculty of Education, Health and Human Sciences. I would love to hear more about that and what you're doing with that.
Yeah, so the task force, I'm not sure if the other officers covered a bit about it, but the task force is there to deal with all the, I guess, the worst performing courses and also some of the best ones. So within Education, Health and Human Sciences, there were some good courses. I believe the worst performing course in the university was in that faculty as well, and we've definitely, even with that one, managed to find steps forward. It turned out that one was doing badly because it was partnered with Canterbury Christchurch, and the aspects by Canterbury Christchurch were the issue. So it was joint between the two universities. So we are kind of looking at reforming that. There's also within the sort of good practice, we've seen there were some courses where they'd, for example, teaching, or education, they'd been kind of looking at more inclusive ways of teaching that were more tailored to students, and that was something that sparked my interest, as it kind of reminded me of the work around decolonising the curriculum. So I'm quite keen to look into that, and there were some staff in the faculty who were keen to connect with different things. I'm going to work with our activities team to, for example, look at connecting Team Greenwich and the sports department. Hopefully we can get the faculty to commit to that, as that's something we've been trying to do for a few years. So yeah, overall it seemed okay. I think there were some issues around placements, and I think a lot of what the faculty were reflecting on, they were saying were kind of one-off. They felt it was like a one-off low score, as opposed to continuing low scores. But it is something that I'm going to keep an eye on, as I know, especially with placements, there's been issues. There's always issues every year, so it's something that I'm going to keep on my radar. But yeah, I hope that gives you some taste of what happened.
It does. Thank you very much for answering my question.
Great. And with the minute and 40 seconds we have left, I just wanted to ask about the measurable goals that you're going to set for yourself. Because looking at your body of work, a lot of it is continuous and will have to be continuous. Like you mentioned earlier about having like a lasting legacy, if you want to call it. Especially looking at something like decolonization of the university, that's not going to happen overnight. So my question is, how are you going to make sure that you're actually making measurable progress on some of these things that you're working on?
I think for me, something that I definitely learned from last year as well is that just that, like, that's why I kind of, I think last year what happened was with decolonizing, it was this big thing that we had, I sort of put demands together, and I was like, okay, well, I could address this in different ways. I could go to people, I could put on events to raise awareness. But I think what I ended up on was this idea of maybe finding ways to help people to understand how they're decolonizing. And I think that was my way of making it a bit smaller, a bit more manageable for me to produce something, but also allows, I don't know, it's not, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, I feel like I kind of did notice that I needed to refine things to be easier to kind of get done and to start something that someone else can hopefully continue. But I do think, for me, I wouldn't want to measure, like, I struggle to measure success because I don't necessarily notice success, so that's something I do need to work on. But I think I'd maybe, for example, measure you know, have I addressed different areas? Have I addressed all the areas I wanted to address? If I'm looking at intersectionality, you know, have I been talking about a range of different identities, or do I need to do more work on a specific group? Yeah, I think for me, I definitely do need to take that and think more deeply about measuring, because it is something that I struggle with, just because I sometimes struggle to comprehend what I've done or what I'm doing. Sometimes, yeah, I know that's not the best answer, but